step back there each time. I was asked to record these classes for some that can't be here on Wednesday night, so just rush and push buttons and do all that to get started. So sorry about the delay. A couple of things about our classes. I've dropped the ball a little bit on being on time with some things. The elders can tell you that I tried. Back in October, we had a meeting, and I said, I'm getting ready for the classes for 2024 and starting to put things down. And I said, okay, I've got time, and I got started, and then I did it in October, and then I didn't keep getting it finished. So got things lined up for this first quarter for this year, but an issue happened with the material that we ordered. They said it's being reprinted, and they have no idea when they will get it. So I'm going to look at some material that we already have that we can use until that material comes in. So sorry about that delay, but normally we change on the first Sunday of each new quarter. So this coming Sunday would be the first class of the new quarter. But we're in Revelation chapter 12. And we looked at quite a bit of this chapter last time. Okay. So you remember we talked about how chapters 1 through 11 were looking more from the perspective of focusing on God's people and kind of their situation and what they're saying and feeling and experiencing through this time of trial that they're going through. And we see there's, of course, some overlap in the rest of the book, but chapters 12 through the middle of chapter 20 focuses now more from the perspective of the enemies, or at least telling us more about the enemies that's causing the problems for God's people during this time, and what they're saying and doing, and how God is approaching the enemies. And so chapter 12 starts out with a bang from that perspective, because all of a sudden we see a great red dragon come on the scene. And it's so massive. We talked about how it's got 7 heads and 10 horns. It's red. It's a big red dragon. Its tail is so big in verse 4 that it sweeps away a third of the stars. And one of the things that we mentioned last time is that God, whenever he describes Satan, he never paints Satan as if, don't worry about it, not a big deal. Sin is always a big deal, and temptation is a challenge for us, and we must never think, never let our guard down when it comes to Satan. Peter described him as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Here, he's described as a great red dragon. If you wonder specifically, if you weren't here last time, it calls it out in verse 9. Says the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who is called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. So he's pictured as a great red dragon here, massive, able to wipe out a third of the stars. But and the picture we get in verses 1 through 6 is that here's this woman, and she has on her head, in verse 1, a crown of 12 stars. And we talked about how the sun and the moon and the stars remind us of the vision that Joseph had of his parents and his brothers. And so they're the epitome of Israel. The 12 sons of Jacob. And we talked about how the number 12 represents God's people. So the woman represents God's people, and this woman has a child. And so we talked about, for instance, Galatians 4 and verse 4, a child born of woman, born under the law, out of God's people. And who was that child? It was Jesus. We see other descriptions in this section that tell us that this child is referring to Jesus. If you look in Revelation 12 and verse 5, it says, she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. And it refers to a prophecy from Psalm 2 that's used multiple times throughout the New Testament to refer to Jesus. So the child is Jesus, the woman is God's people, Israel, that Jesus comes from. But you get this image of a woman who's about to give birth, and here's a dragon. And when you look at a woman, a pregnant woman, standing up against a dragon that's massive enough to wipe out a third of the stars, when you see those two side by side, what do you think? What's going to happen?
No hope for the woman.
There's no chance for the woman or for her child. And it says that the dragon is, his purpose there in verse 4 is so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. But what we saw instead is that the child was caught up to God, and then it says, and to his throne. And we talked about how, Satan was after Jesus all throughout his life, from the time that he was literally a baby and working through Herod to kill all of the children during that time, all the way up through the ultimate time where Satan struck against Jesus and at his death. And it looks like there's no hope. Jesus is dead. Nothing more can be done. And yet, all of a sudden, he's caught up, right? He's raised from the dead, and he ascends to God to show that he is the Son of God. He is the King. So it paints this picture that yes, things can look dark sometimes, but always with God there's hope, because God is the King. God has the power. And so the story of Jesus tells us that. And what's the point of revisiting this story when it's not Jesus who's in trouble now, but it's God's people who are in trouble now? What's the point of revisiting the story of the cross and the resurrection? Say that again. God will protect. Right. And Jesus talked about that to his disciples. God is with me, and he's going to be with you. Yes, it also means because people hate me, they'll hate you. But that also means that God loves me, and God's going to love you because you follow me, and he's going to protect you. He's going to provide for you. And so we see that in those first 6 verses. And then we started looking at the second story, beginning in verse 7, where you've got Michael, the angel. And anyone that is a Bible student, if you were in our last quarter, you'll remember when we studied the book of Daniel. In Daniel 12 and verse 1, we're introduced to Michael there. And it tells us that he stands guard over the people of God. And so here he is again, waging war against the dragon and the dragon's angels. And there's a very important phrase we talked about in verse 8. What's one of the most important things for us to always remember about Satan from verse 8? He prevailed not. He was not strong enough. So again, it's that same story, right? Here's a big dragon. Here's a baby. There's no hope. With God, there's always hope. Here's Satan and his angels fighting, but they weren't strong enough. They're no match for God and for God's servants. Yes.
With this analogy, it reminds me of the passage where it says that we walk by faith, not by sight.
Right.
Because those are very clear images. Huge dragon, the woman doesn't have a chance. That's what you see by sight.
Right.
But if you know the Lord be with you, who can be against you? So faith is the thing that diffuses the misleading images that often cause fear in our lives.
Right. So, and then look at, we kind of left off with this point here, and I want to pick back up here and talk about some meaning here in Revelation 12 and verses 9 through 11. Let's read Revelation 12, 9 through 11. Terrell, can you read that for us?
This great dragon, the ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, the one deceiving the whole world, was thrown down to the earth with all of his angels. Then I heard a loud voice shouting across the heavens, "It has come at last, salvation and power, and the kingdom of our God, and the authority of his Christ. The accuser of our brothers and sisters has been thrown down to the earth, the one who accused them before our God day and night. And they have defeated him by the blood of the Lamb and by their testimony. And they have not loved their lives so much that they were afraid to die. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who live in the heavens, rejoice. But terror will come on the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you in great anger, knowing that he has a little time."
Okay, so when you read passages like this in Revelation, or you've heard people talk about them, that here's Michael waging war, Michael and God's angels waging war against Satan as his angels, and then Satan's thrown down. What kind of popular applications do people make of these stories? What have you heard?
Future events.
Yeah. Yeah, ultimately, they either go one way or the other. Is let me tell you when in the past this took place, and not just in the past, because even what we're saying tonight is it does represent some things that actually happened. But what people often do is, let me tell you what happened long before the earth was ever created, and how there was this war in heaven, and here's what happened to Satan, and all of a sudden more details get thrown in than what's actually in the text. Or they go the way that Joe's talking about. Let me tell you what this is represent. This is representing in 3322 AD, when Rome is going to come back in the form of Iraq and Russia, and they fill in all of these things about what this means. But one of the key things that we talked about with the book of Revelation is oftentimes it tells us enough within the text to know at least what it doesn't mean, and most likely what it does mean. And that's true of this passage here. So you've got the great dragon was thrown down, but then in verse 10 and 11, how did this happen? How was Satan thrown down according to verses 10 and 11? Because it says, after this happened in verse 10, then I heard, now the salvation, and what does it tell us? What has happened?
The kingdom of God and the authority of Christ have come.
Okay, the kingdom, the reign of God, the authority of Christ has come. When did that come? Yeah, when Jesus rose from the dead to prove that he was the Son of God. Acts 13 talks about, that's the point where he was shown to be the king. And it says, for the accuser of our brethren has been thrown down. And verse 11, they overcame him because of what? What does Satan have to accuse us of?
Sin.
Our sin. And would he be right about that? Yeah. We've sinned, and we fall short of the glory of God. And we should be judged for that. But what happened? Why has the accuser been thrown down? What happened to make his rightful accusations void? Okay. Because of the blood of the Lamb. So the beginning of chapter 12 with the great red dragon was painting this picture about Jesus going to the cross and his resurrection, and showing the dragon was defeated because he thought he destroyed Jesus in the cross, and he rose up and he ascended and he took his throne. And this story is saying the same thing. It's painting this picture about, here's the enemy. It's coming up against God's people, what are we going to do? How are we going to stand against the devil and his angels? Is Michael going to be able to do anything? No, the devil and his angels were not strong enough. Why? Because Jesus died for our sins and his blood makes Satan's accusations void.
Hebrews 2:14.
Yeah. You want to quote it for us?
Yeah, inasmuch then as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he himself likewise shared in the same, that through death he might destroy him who had the power of death, that is, the devil, and release those who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage.
Okay. They're released. They're saved because Jesus came, became one of us, lived his life, became the perfect sacrifice, died and rose again to be our priest and our king. So, go ahead.
Could I add something?
Please.
It's kind of elementary, but it says, by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. He can do what we need, but unless we accept it, it's not for us.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's a big point here in Revelation. Yeah. Yeah, and the word of their testimony happens in two, we confess in two ways. Jesus talked about that. We confess with our lives and we confess with our mouth who he is. And that's what they did, the word of their testimony. It's a great point. But it just really shows us the heart of the book of Revelation is about painting these pictures of how we feel sometimes and of how things look. We feel cornered. We feel that we can't overcome temptation. We feel that the world is becoming more and more evil, and the only thing in our future is persecution and suffering. That's what God's people felt. It was dark. It was hard. It felt hopeless. And God says, let me paint you this picture. Yeah, doesn't it feel like a great red dragon? That's how Jesus felt. But remember what happened to Jesus. And does it feel like there's an army of Satan and sinfulness coming against you and wickedness? He says, yeah, I understand that, but they're not strong enough. Remember, Jesus has released you by his blood. Jesus has saved you. So just as you think about Revelation, as you read it yourself, as you talk to other people, just continue to remember that. These are pictures intended to help us to see what happens in reality. Do you remember when the king, can't remember the king's name at the time, sent soldiers against Elisha and his servant, Gehazi? And Gehazi comes running up to Elisha and says, here they are, they're coming after us. The army's coming after us. What did Elisha say? Do you remember?
He prayed God and allowed Gehazi to see.
Yeah. God, please open his eyes. What did Gehazi's eyes need opening to? Because Gehazi could see. He was telling him what was going on. So what did his eyes need opening to? Yeah, God's involvement. How did you say it?
The fiery army that was
Yeah.
on the mountain.
Yeah, so go ahead. Were you going to say something else?
Nothing important. John 16, verse 33, be of good courage.
Yes.
I have, past tense, overcome the world.
Yes. He needed to see that there's always a spiritual reality behind the physical reality. We see our problems in our lives. We see the challenges. And what we need to see by faith, we walk by faith, not by sight, is that there is literally a spiritual reality that corresponds to this physical reality. Sometimes we don't talk in those terms. Sometimes I think we're afraid a little bit to talk like that because we're afraid of, just what we were talking about earlier. Some people go off on the deep end with some visions and ideas about how things, but where they go off on the deep end is when they add things to the text. But we don't have to add things to the text to say that there is a spiritual reality that corresponds to our physical reality. The Bible tells us that. There is things going on around us that we can't see right now. but they're as real as touching you and me. And that's part of the lesson of the book of Revelation that we need to see. Because all those Christians could see at that time was, I saw that Christian got beat. I saw that Christian went to the market and they turned them away and he couldn't buy food for his family because he served God. I saw that Christian decide to turn to wickedness and reject the Lord. That's what they saw. And what they needed to see is God will never leave you nor forsake you, and he's always there.
Psalm 23, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. These people are confronted with evil on a daily basis all around them. And like you said, they need to lift up their eyes beyond the physical reality and realize there's spiritual help behind the dangers that we see.
Right.
And that's where usually the solution to the problems are. Is that ability to see
Right.
what God can provide if we'll just lift up our eyes and see it.
Right. Any other thoughts, comments about all of that?
I think up to this point, the book of Revelation has been primarily looking at the viewpoint of the saints and the Christians,
Mhm.
what's happening to them.
Right.
Now it's starting to turn and show them there's something else going on that you don't even realize what all is happening.
Right. So, and he's continuing to paint that picture and helping them to see. Look again at verse 12. Revelation 12:12. Rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, knowing that he has only a short time. So Satan's thrown down, but we said the text tells us he's thrown down through the death and resurrection of Jesus. Then it switches and okay, now that he's thrown down, if you live in the heavens, you get to rejoice because you've overcome him. If you live on the earth, woe to you. Who are those people? Who lives in the heavens and who lives on the earth?
The Bible says our citizenship is in heaven.
Okay,
It says that about saints that are living.
good. Our citizenship is in heaven. What else? What's some other New Testament texts that tell us about our relationship to heaven right now? Say that again.
Ephesians 2, we're seated in heaven.
Seated with him in the heavenly places. So, where are you right now? We're in the heavenly places. It's a trick question, in a sense, because the Bible shows us both pictures. As Christians, we live on the earth, but we also live in heaven at the same time. I'm sitting with Christ in the heavenly places right now. I'm ruling with Christ. I'm reigning with Christ right now. But wait, I'm here on earth, and I get sick, and I see Christians suffer, and I see sin, and so we live in between. And exactly what Joe quoted earlier, John 16 and verse 33, in the world you will have what? You're going to have trouble. You're going to have tribulation. You're going to have trials. Anybody here ever have tribulation or trials? Yeah, right? But you have another perspective too. Do we have different perspectives on death? What did Paul say? How are we different when it comes to our perspective on death? We have hope. We do not grieve as others do because of the hope that we have in Jesus. There's that balance. We're living between two worlds. We believe with all of our heart that our hope is as sure as we are breathing right now. But we also know that we live in a world where we suffer and we hurt and our breath can be taken away from us. That's the picture here in Revelation 12. Rejoice, O heavens. If you live in heaven, even though you're here on earth, if you live in heaven, you get to rejoice. Because though you have tribulation, I have overcome the world. Because you live in both places. But what about the people who only live on the earth?
Third blow for them.
What do they have when it comes to trouble and death and beyond death? They don't have any hope. And so whatever their trouble is now, it's their trouble, and then judgment comes after that. So it's a beautiful picture that he's trying to get the Christians to see. Yes, I know you're on earth. Yes, I know you're suffering, but I am with you. And I have overcome the world. Trust in that. So, verse 13, when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. Now, here's that double it. Rejoice, you who live in the heavens, but who's the woman? The woman is God's people. And so Satan's coming after us. So yes, we live in the heavens and we can rejoice, even though Satan's coming after us. And so he's persecuting the woman, but what happens in verse 14? But the 2 wings of the great eagle were given to the woman so that she could fly into the wilderness to her place where she was nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. And the serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood. Now pause here for a second. We're told who the serpent was, who the dragon was. Who is it?
Satan.
What does Satan do? What is he most known for? Lies, deceit. Now listen, the serpent poured a water like a river out of his mouth. What do you think that's talking about? A flood of deceit. That's what comes out of Satan, is a flood, a river of lies, constantly trying to pummel God's people. And he feeds the world. He just floods the world with his lies. And it poured like a water, like a river out of his mouth, so that he might cause her to be swept away with the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and drank up the river, which the dragon poured out of his mouth. So the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. God's people are saved again. Even though there's this flood of lies trying to destroy them. Now, what does this mean in the context? Well, I haven't referred to the history too much, and I'm still not going to a whole lot. But at the end of the 1st century and beginning of the 2nd century, there was a really great lie that began to grow. And it even was present even before Jesus was born, but it just got bigger. And that was the lie that the emperors became gods. And there were certain pockets in Rome where this began to grow. And one of the things that we pointed out is right where these 7 churches of Asia are, history tells us these were core places for the emperor cult to grow. And it became a flood of lies where if you don't worship the emperor and the gods of Rome, maybe something that you can relate to is, we have unions today, right, with certain industries. Well, they had guilds that were tied to the Roman gods. And so what do you think if you were part of one of those industries and then they found out you didn't worship the emperor or the gods of Rome? You might lose your job. Say what now? Yeah, no work. And if those places are the ones that are you're buying your household goods from, and they find out you're a Christian and you don't worship, what do you think is going to happen? They're not going to sell to you. You're going to see that described coming up about those who couldn't buy and sell because of their faith. And so this lie was going out, and Christians had to make a decision whether they were going to give in to this lie and begin worshiping the emperor, or continue being faithful to Jesus and suffer some of this social persecution, and then it became physical persecution. Any other thoughts through the rest of chapter 12?
The two descriptions that clearly indicate God's involvement, I like those because it shows us that God is still working, even if it's kind of behind the scenes. Like, so what does he mean he gave her two wings? So we may not know all the details of it, but clearly we can read this and see, okay, God's the one that's doing this. Didn't say that, Peter stood up, the chief apostles, and he did this miracle, and then, put wings on the Christians, they flew away.
Right.
So, and just like the earth opening up and swallowing, I mean, to me it shows the intricacy of God's awareness of what's going on among his people, his concern for his people, but also the use of his great power and what he will do when he knows the right time has come.
Right.
So to me it should be a comfort, maybe.
Yeah.
We could draw from that okay, doesn't mean that I will never suffer, but I can always live with the understanding that God will bring a stop to this
Right.
when he deems, because he sees the big picture, when he understands now's the time to stop it, and he does.
Do you remember another passage where God promised for the wings of eagles to be given to his people?
Isaiah 40.
Okay, Isaiah 40. And then Exodus.
Egypt.
Yeah.
Brought out as of eagle's wings.
Yes. You remember that when they left Egypt, how the eagles carried them out? No, that's not what really happened, right? We know about the parting of the Red Sea and all of that. But in Exodus 19 and verse 4, it says, "You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself." And then Isaiah 40 and verse 31, you're going to, walk and not be weary. You're going to rise up with wings as eagles. So it's a very biblical image to talk about God's salvation and his providence that way to save his people. Laura, you had something?
Well, the other part of what Terrell was commenting on is that when you look at this chapter and you're looking at Satan, when it describes as a dragon with 7 heads, that's corruption of creation. And so that is what Satan does. But notice that he's got a plan. I'm going to destroy the woman and the child. Well, maybe not. I'm going to have this battle with Michael. Well, maybe not. And then when you look at verse 13, the dragon was like, "Oh, I'm at Earth. What am I doing here? Now I've got to do this." So you see Satan, even in the imagery here, being, "Oh, I'm shocked. Now let me go to plan F, G,
Yeah.
type
Right.
of thing." He's got a plan, but it's always running to catch up and always corrupting what is good and true to try and distort.
Right. And I think that's just tying in with what you're saying. We shouldn't miss the phrase at the end of Revelation 12:12. "The devil has come down to you having great wrath, knowing that he has only a short time." When is God ever described as panicking because he only has a short time to get something done? Never. When is he ever, having to go to plan B or C or D or E or F? Never. His will always be done. We have passages that says, "My will shall never be thwarted." And yet here's Satan, as powerful of a dragon as he is, panicking because my time's running short. I've got to figure out how I'm going to make this work.
And then right after that, it's like, and the dragon saw he'd been cast to the earth. It's like he was thrown out and he didn't know where he was going to go.
Yeah. Peggy, you had something? I thought.
Just thinking about, the dragon and us, the dragon as well as us, we're all part of the creation, and God is the creator. But yet the dragon thinks he has all this power, but anything he has cannot be God, because God is the creator.
Right. And I think it's Jude that tells us that Satan and his angels would not, something to the effect of would not keep their domain. In other words, God's the creator, God's the king, and he says, you do this. And they said, no, I don't think we're going to do that. And how foolish is that? And how foolish are we to think we're going to follow someone else rather than the creator? No matter how big and great and powerful they may be, they're never going to be as big and great, as powerful as the creator.
One more thing about the wings, made me think of escape. God's providing a way of escape. And even this really doesn't seem related, but to me it is kind of related. That in 1 Corinthians, he tells us there's no temptation too great that we can't overcome it, because he will provide a way of escape.
Right. Yes.
And so I'm sure these Christians were tempted to find their own way of escape and not look to God, because they were facing physical things that were very scary.
Right.
But in God they didn't have to fear. But I think that's hard for us sometimes, because we fear the physical. We fear the physical pain. We fear the physical rejection. And like you said, we have to think on a more spiritual plane. And I think that's why it's so important for us to read and study our Bible and to know God closer. Because the closer you know somebody, the more you can trust them.
Yeah.
So when we get that kind of relationship, we can look on a more spiritual plane.
No, but I think you make a really important point is, again, these great pictures are not just for us to see and think about something cool. It's for us to make that practical application of, there is a way of escape, and God is with me, and I need to trust that and make the right decision tomorrow when I go to work or when I go to the store or whatever I'm doing. That's what this is about. Charmin?
I was just thinking, there is a constant battle that's going on, still is,
Mhm.
has been, and there's a cost of discipleship, and that's something that we have to take into account. It seems to me, with the remnant of her seed, it's going to be a continual thing. Whoever is keeping the commandments, he's going to go after.
Yeah, that's exactly right. He went after them, and when he feels like he's going to lose over here, now he's going to go look for someone else. And so we've got to be on guard. Lori?
Just a couple of quick thoughts. What you brought out a while ago, I never thought of it in that way, but yes, I see it, about the heavenly realm.
Hmm.
I can't really comprehend living in heaven on earth, because I feel like we live too much of hell on earth,
Hmm. Yeah.
But the heavenly realm, just that spiritual relationship, and knowing that we can always be in his presence. His presence is always there.
Right.
Like that one in the Bible that could see,
Yeah.
heavenly beings, when their spiritual eyes were open. What is in our presence every day?
Yeah.
We don't spiritually see, because we don't really have spiritual eyes to see. We live too much in the natural and the carnal.
Are you ever sitting in a Bible class or a worship service singing a hymn, and you get that picture in your mind that you're singing? I often get it, what's the phrase? It's the song starts out with Jesus standing on a hill. No, and I think it's even taken from Revelation. What's the song? Anyways, I'll think of it later. But the point is sometimes we when we're here, when we're doing those things, then we start to see, And I think that's why the Bible emphasizes how important it is that we're here, we're together, we're worshiping, we're spending time with one another, with people that are going to help us see, because when more of our time is taken up with people that are helping us to focus on this world, then it takes us away from that.
And then the last thought, I mean, I just like that whole spiritual realm thing here on earth, because that's where we should be living.
Right.
You know, with that realization. But the other thing about the eagle's wings, you know, I read something, and I can't really say it well. I'm sure there's someone else here that can say it much better. But eagle, they don't fly through the storm. They soar above the storm. And they are able to stay uplifted. And I don't know how to say this.
No, I think that makes sense. The eagle flies above the storm. The storm's still there, but they're able to go above it. Steve?
I think what we're doing is proper. We need to study Revelation and understand the context and what the people there were dealing with, and that it really had all this meaning to those Christians at this time.
Right.
And I think that's important in our study to recognize all of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think we have to be careful we don't just pigeonhole it and say, okay, this is all happening. God was so involved and he took care of this period of time, and then it ended. He's still active.
That's right.
He's still involved. And we need to really understand that.
Yeah, amen. I'll never leave you or forsake you. And that means now, too, just as much as it did then. So I want us to get into chapter 13 with our last few minutes and begin to see the next picture that he's painting. And he's building off of this one to talk about what they're facing. Chapter 13 and verse 1, "And the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore. Then I saw," now try to picture this in your mind as we're reading it. "Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems, and on his heads were blasphemous names. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. They worshiped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, 'Who is like the beast, and who is able to wage war with him?' There was given to him a mouth speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. It was also given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. All who dwell on the earth will worship him. Everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is destined for captivity, to captivity he goes. If anyone kills with the sword he must be killed. Here is the perseverance and the faith of the saints." So, what do we see next? You got the dragon, and now what do you see?
Beast.
Okay, there's a beast. And when you start looking at the description of this beast in chapter 13 and verse 1, what do you notice?
7 heads.
Looks a lot like the dragon. The dragon in chapter 12 and verse 3, 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast, chapter 13 and verse 1, 7 heads and 10 horns. The dragon in chapter 12 and verse 3, 7 diadems. The beast, 10 diadems. Makes war with the saints, chapter 12 and verse 17. And then chapter 13 and verse 7 makes war with the saints. You think we're intended to see the similarities there? And then they're so similar, what might you think? Where did this beast come from? Came out of the dragon. It came from Satan, as if it's Satan's child. And where does the beast get his authority from? Yeah. From the dragon. So, the beast and the dragon are not the same, but they're closely related. And it represents a specific thing that Satan has used as his weapon against the saints. And when you read some of the descriptions, let's skip ahead to verse 4. What are they saying about the beast? Who is like the beast, and what else? I'm sorry? Who's able to fight or wage war? Who or what wages war? Nations wage war. What do people say about Rome? Rome would never fall. Now, who can fight against Rome? Now be careful, sometimes people say the same thing about America. But, so you have the tie-in with the nation, but I want you to notice, for our last point, I want you to hold your place here in chapter 13, but flip back to Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7. And you remember the vision there that we studied of the four beasts? Look in chapter 7 and verse 4. What was the first one like? Like a lion. And if you flip back to chapter 13 and verse 2, what's the first thing it says? Like a lion or a leopard. And if you flip back to Daniel 7 and verse 5, what was the second beast like? A bear. And then you flip back to 13 and verse 2. He had feet like those of a bear, mouth like that of a lion. Chapter 7 and verse 6, that's where the leopard comes in. In Daniel 7 and verse 6, he says another one like a leopard. And then it says of the fourth beast in verse 7 of Daniel 7, after this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Now, in the prophecy of Daniel, what were all of these beasts? What did they represent? Nations. Represent Babylon, Assyria, Greece, and then finally Rome was that fourth beast. And now we see these similarities, how this fourth beast was more dreadful, had all the power of the beast before it. And we get that same picture of this beast here in Revelation 13. I think we're meant to see that connection between these two beasts. Any other thoughts about that? Our time's up. All right, we'll pick up there, but think about that. And so if this is representing the nation of Rome, how is Satan using that as his weapon against the saints? And what are some of the things that it says about it? So read chapters 13 and 14 before Sunday.